This was a fairly short and simple encounter, but it still bothers me when I think about it. I'm a female and was 18 at the time. I was walking home alone from a night out with friends. For some reason, I thought I was invincible. It was something I will never do now, even if I had been drinking. I was walking back on the main road by the sea, but because it was very early in the morning, there was absolutely no one around and it was very dark. A man in a yellow car slowed down beside me and said something like, "Get in, I'm a taxi, get in." Taxis are black where I live and are required to have certain stickers to identify them as a legit taxi. I was drunk, but not stupid enough to buy it. I knew that he was not a taxi driver, so I kicked up a fuss and shouted at him various fuck offs, "You're not a fucking taxi," etc., and he drove off quickly. What bothers me is, if he did try to physically overpower me, he probably would have. I'm a 19-year-old female. I was out to eat with my boyfriend at a place where it has a live show right next door. We decided to listen outside for some of the bands playing once we were done eating. It was around 9 p.m. at this time. Shortly after going outside, this girl came up to me and starts talking to me about all kinds of things. She has bright red hair, many piercings and tattoos. The first thing she did was compliment me about what I was wearing. I wasn't wearing anything special, a plain pink dress and Crocs. She seemed very friendly and continued the conversation with us. Mainly me though. I figured it was because I have piercings and a tattoo. I also kind of chalked it up as her being drunk and just overly friendly. Eventually, she asked me weird questions that I didn't really understand and I can't recall. Something along the lines of, "What's your purpose here?" or something like that. I just remember not understanding what she was asking me and just telling her where I worked because it sounded like that's what she was asking me. She says she works in a strip club in the same town and to come dance. She left abruptly after while texting on her phone and went over to this guy. Me and my boyfriend went to leave. I really thought nothing of it and we passed by them. After turning the corner, my boyfriend told me to check and see if we were being followed. I looked behind my shoulder and I didn't see anyone. We walked a little further and I looked back again and there was the guy. He was walking extremely quick and caught up pretty fast. He followed me all the way to my car, which was at least a mile away, until we got it and locked the doors. He was just a couple feet away from my car before he turned around. My boyfriend told me to start the car ASAP, and once we left, he told me that as we passed them, he heard the girl say to the guy something along the lines of, "She's a little nervous, but..." And he just had a bad vibe that I was going to be sex trafficked, or that they were going to try to pimp me out, maybe snatch me up, I don't know. It wouldn't have been very hard for him to do. He was at least double my weight, as I'm only 100 pounds. He was following with a lot of speed, and I mean, really, what was his motive? Trigger warning for this story. This was many years ago, maybe when I was 20 or 21. I was assaulted when out jogging in a park while on vacation, someplace north in Ontario. It was deep in the woods. I was listening to music, alone. I should have been more careful. There was this guy with a blue dirt bike at the entrance of the trail who was acting really creepy and suspicious. He kept trying to start a conversation with me as I was unpacking my stuff and getting ready. Kept asking me things like, "Where did you come from?" or "You work out?" When I was changing my shoes, he asked me for my shoe size, and I immediately thought that he was a creep. I just slightly chatted with him and kept my gaze down. I was wearing a hat, so I was hoping that it would hide my face. Nearly half an hour of jogging and sightseeing, I saw the blue bike ahead. It was parked off to the side, and I remember the feeling like a lump in my stomach suddenly formed, and I thought for sure that this guy was probably going to try something. I was on the main path for the whole way, but considering he was waiting there, I decided to backtrack a little and take the nearest side path to avoid the encounter. 5 minutes into the side path, there was a narrow spot in the tree that led to an old concrete square. I think it was a water reservoir or foundation or something. I wasn't thinking and just kept going. Trigger warning here. I stepped in this black adhesive stuff on the other side of the lip of the concrete. My shoes were completely stuck. It was like some sort of tar or glue. I have no idea. I didn't know what it was and just assumed it was something from the structure, like leftover construction stuff or something. I spent a couple of minutes just trying to work my shoes out, but eventually had to take them off for better leverage. Then I saw the man coming towards me. I just felt panicked. I was gonna get the bear spray when he said he was just here to help. I didn't want to potentially aggravate him or do something that could get me in trouble, so I just stood back and let him try to get my shoe out. I noticed that he was just pretending that he couldn't get them out, and I remembered what he said about my shoe size and thought something was off, so I backed away and considered spraying him. It happened fast. He turned around and slapped my foot with the black stuff. I stumbled trying to get back. I missed the spray, and he was wrestling it out of my hand. I tried to knee him in the groin. He released me, and I ran off. I got my sock off and was able to run, but he just had more of the stuff. He had a metal bucket of this black stuff, and he was slapping handfuls of it at my feet. I couldn't kick him, and it was difficult to move. I was screaming and hitting him the best I could. He pushed me to the ground, took my backpack, and just continued sticking the stuff to me. My body was frozen in fear. I heard a buzzing sound, and I knew what it was without seeing it. I began struggling to get up and kick him, do something. My clothes were pinned, and my arms too. I'm not going to go into detail, but he used a vibrator on me. I was crying, stretching as far as I could. If I almost got an arm out, he would add more. I rarely ever masturbated at the time, so suffice to say, it was overstimulation. He didn't undress me apart from my pack and socks, and didn't use his penis anywhere, so I'm at least grateful of that. He just kept buzzing and fondling my body, asking me things like, "Do you like it? Does it feel good?" It was probably around an hour of that, and he recorded it. I just let him do whatever until I could find a way out or someone would come by. He brought this towel up to my nose. It was fuming in some sort of chemical. I was thrashing and trying to scream. Somebody heard, I guess, and shouted. I don't remember much. Time was all fuzzy. It felt like I was falling on a roller coaster. When I got my thoughts back together, it was getting dark and I was alone. I spent a long time getting up without ripping my clothes off after being stuck and scraping off my body where it was stuck to my skin. I don't know what the stuff was, but Googling it suggested bird lime or construction adhesive. It was apparently a type of fetish, so yeah. I walked back to my car. There was nobody there at night, and I just drove back to my cabin and sat there in the bath, not even turning the water on, just sitting there, thinking of what happened, trying to get as much of that stuff off of me before I washed myself. My feet and parts around my belly were stained black for a couple weeks. That night, I laid there silent. Even now, just touching stuff like soap brings back that time, and I can't help but feel weird by the slimy feeling of it. I'm wondering if anyone else has had a similar experience or an encounter with black adhesive. This happened a few years ago in Upper Ontario on a semi-official hiking trail. I really don't remember much of what happened during or after the assault, possibly because of whatever fumes I was exposed to. I remember driving very slowly because I was still feeling off balance. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have been driving, but there was no traffic that late. So, when I was 17, I just got in my first car. One day, I drove my brother and myself to the dentist. While we were waiting in the lobby, I noticed someone had parked really badly next to my car. Since it was new, I was pretty paranoid about it getting scratched or something. My brother went in for his appointment, and I decided to move my car to a safer spot. After I parked in my new spot, I was walking back to the office. Just before I could cross the parking lot to get inside, a minivan with super tinted windows, like so tinted that there was this weird blue hue, pulled up close to me and almost hit me. I thought it was strange, but just walked around it. As I was heading to the door, I caught my reflection in the glass and noticed that the guy was getting out of the van and starting to follow me. At first, I didn't think much of it, and I just started walking faster, but then he started running after me. That's when I realized, okay, this is actually happening, and I started running too. I barely made it to the door before he could grab me. The door was glass, and I could see his reflection. He was reaching out, like inches away from me. He looked like a totally regular guy, wearing a button-up shirt and khakis, which made the whole thing even more surreal. I ran inside and he didn't follow, probably because he didn't want to be seen. I was completely shocked and kind of in denial of what just happened because it all went down so fast. I looked out the window and saw him holding a purple cloth in his hand. No idea what that was about. He looked around, then got back in the minivan and sped off. I told the receptionist, but I was still pretty shaken up and confused. The whole thing happened in less than a minute. I've wondered what would have happened to me if I hadn't run. I do some volunteering at a hospital 3 times a week that involves me reporting to the hospital at 5 a.m. I enjoy volunteering. I've been doing it for almost 2 years, and I've never had any issues until last week. Last week, I was a bit early on one of my volunteer days, and had about 30 minutes before I had to report in. I normally would have just waited in my car, but I had been pretty stressed out about things in my personal life, so I thought that I would go for a little walk to burn off some steam and clear my head. After all, this was a pretty nice area, so what could go wrong? It's like 4:30 a.m., so naturally the streets are all quiet, but it seems pretty peaceful. Then up ahead I see someone walking in my direction. Kinda odd, I guess, but I didn't think too much of it. Him being out here at this hour isn't inherently suspicious. After all, does being out here at this hour automatically make me suspicious too? I keep walking. We make quick eye contact when we cross paths, and I suddenly got this bad feeling about this man. I can't explain it other than instincts. Sometimes you just have a bad gut feeling about someone, you know? That's what I felt as I passed this man, and I immediately went on high alert and made sure that he wasn't going to approach me from behind or something. Very soon after walking by this man, I'm talking about 15 to 20 seconds, I passed by one of the many parked cars on the street. Except this parked car is different. There's a man sitting at the wheel. The man waves at me and beckons me over. Again, pretty darn creepy, but not inherently worth freaking out over. But as I keep walking, I realize while the car was parked, it wasn't off. It was simply in park because the car starts driving in the same direction that I'm walking, and it drives at a pace essentially matching my walking speed. At this point, I've had enough and my brain is saying, nope. So I immediately turn around and start speed walking back in the direction I came from. Then I saw something that, in the moment, scared the fuck out of me. The first man that I had encountered walking in the other direction, which was now probably like 40 seconds ago, was now standing pretty close to me, like way closer than someone who had been walking in the other direction should be. And then he makes eye contact with me, then starts walking in my direction. I'm incredibly suspicious and more than a bit nervous at this point. And because it's pretty dark out, I decide to play a hunch. My car keys fold out in a manner very similar to a switchblade, so I immediately pull it out, press a button to make the key fold out, and stare at him for a second. I believe he was caught off guard because he stopped walking for a second. Well, that second was all I needed. I immediately took off running at top speed, crossed the street, and kept running down the street. I'm no Olympian, but I was on the cross country team at the D2 college and still run multiple times a week, so I'm pretty confident that I can outrun the average person by a comfortable margin. Still, I didn't want to take any chances and ran all the way back to the hospital. So what do you guys think? I'm not crazy, right? I'm not necessarily saying that I was going to be the next prominent murder victim or kidnapping victim, but there was definitely something going on here, right? I'm going to start out by saying this isn't some flashy, scary story and doesn't have the most satisfying ending, but no one got hurt, which I'm grateful for. This all happened when I was in 5th or 6th grade. I'm Canadian, so we have primary school, kindergarten to grade 8, high school, grade 9 to grade 12 or 13, then college or university. So I would have been around 8 or 9 at this time. I'm now writing this as a 23-year-old, going to be 24 in July, so my memory may be a bit foggy, but what happened this day will forever stand out to me. My sister and I, who is 2 years younger than me, let's call her Paya, went to this little French immersion school. At the time, we were not living close to it, and had to take a school bus. The bus stop where we would be picked up in the morning and dropped off in the afternoon was about a block or so away from the apartment buildings we lived in. My sister and I would get up at 7 a.m. to catch the bus at 7:30 to get to school by 8. There was another family that also caught the bus at our stop with some younger children, so we were never fully alone. But my sister and I would walk there from home without any adults because my mother worked nights and my sister and I thought we were old enough to walk the short distance alone. This is important later. This all happened during late spring, think around April-May, when the weather was getting consistently hotter during the day, upwards of 20 degrees Celsius. Again, important later. I should also note that I have allergenic asthma, which means activities like running or strenuous exercise, as well as allergens like pollen, can trigger my asthma. For this reason, I wasn't a big runner, and seeing me run was a rare occurrence. So in the morning, I'm not a morning person and never have been. Bright and early at 7:15 a.m., my sister and I head out to go wait at the bus stop for the school bus. Everything was pretty normal, me being the more obviously tired one of us. But something stuck out to me. I noticed an old brown pickup truck parked in one of the driveways of a nearby house. A person sat in the driver's seat seemingly doing nothing, maybe asleep. This wouldn't have been weird, except I knew the people that lived there, and they drove a minivan. Maybe it was just how ugly the color of the brown pickup was, but it stuck out to me. In hindsight, I should have questioned why the guy was in the truck just sat there in the vehicle for over 15 minutes doing nothing, but I was too tired to care. Off to school we went, and the day was honestly forgettable in how routine it was. On the bus to go home, however, my sister and I got into an argument. So when we got to our stop, Paya took off running back to the house ahead of me, leaving me with the parents who picked up their younger children at the stop. And then after they left, I was alone. I was not impressed by the stunt that my sister had pulled, but began my walk down the street with traffic near me, going the same way I was walking. I was about a minute into my walk home when I noticed that brown pickup truck that looked oddly familiar. I hadn't realized at the time, but it was probably the one from the morning. It was slowing down beside me as I walked. Now, it was a pretty hot day. One kid collapsed during recess because of heat stroke, so I was having a hard time already due to the heat. The driver from the old brown pickup rolls down the passenger window to talk to me, waving a hand at me to get me to stop. I do stop because I was raised to be polite, but I kept my distance. A patch of grass separating the curb and the sidewalk, meaning I had at least 60 centimeters of space between me and the curb. "Hey kiddo, where you headed?" The driver, a man in his late 50s or so, asked. Now, I had been raised knowing all about stranger danger, so I was already on guard about this. "Home," I told him, purposely vague about it. At this point, the man leaned over and unlocked the passenger door, and I was able to see him a little better. He had a tattoo of what I think was a tiger or some other animal up his right arm. He wore a plain gray muscle shirt. I couldn't see what kind of pants he was wearing because I'm short. His hair was salt and pepper, pulled back into a greasy ponytail, and he had a mustache. His skin tone was tan, but he seemed to be Caucasian, and his hands were large, with a scar across his knuckles. "How about you hop in and I'll give you a ride? It's pretty hot out here today," this complete stranger offered me, with a smile, and I noticed he seemed to have a missing tooth. I, of course, smiled back, not to be rude, and simply said a polite, "No thank you, sir," and started walking again. Now, this would have been fine and dandy if it had ended like that, but instead he began keeping pace with me with his truck, and insisting I get in, that it was too hot out, and that all the other kids had been picked up. Now, this struck me as odd, and still does even now, because this meant he had been watching when all of us got off the bus. Though I guess he didn't notice my sister run off, but still, this was creepy. I again said, "No thank you," but he didn't seem to take the hint. In fact, he became more pushy, and maybe a little irritated. He had pulled up so close to the curb that he was almost jumping it with his pickup now. And at this point, I was really feeling scared. This man might try to do something I wouldn't like. So I quickly said, "Have a nice day," and then took off running as fast as I could towards the apartment complex. I vaguely heard him shout something to me, but I just kept running, cutting over the grassy hill with a few trees on it, instead of staying on the sidewalk. I saw that someone had just left the underground parking area that connected two of the buildings, so I ran in just before the door that lets the cars out closed. I didn't stop running until I made it to the 8th floor, got into my house and slammed and locked the door. At this point, I was in a full-blown asthma attack, as well as crying in fear. I had collapsed against the door, hyperventilating and sobbing, and my sister was now freaking out at how I just burst in like that. I couldn't get out what I was trying to say, as I could barely breathe. I eventually was able to calm down, and my mother came home from what she had been doing. I was able to explain what happened. My mother then called the police, and we had a female officer come interview me, to whom I recounted only what had happened on my way home from the bus stop. I didn't put it together that he had probably been watching us earlier that morning, as well as later. The nice policewoman took my statement. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of the investigation, and it didn't help that I couldn't remember the license plate, other than it looked like it wasn't from Ontario, Canada, which in hindsight is even scarier to me. So I never really heard anything after that. But to the man who may or may not have tried to kidnap me on my way home from school, let's not meet, ever. It was summer break, and we, my family, didn't go on any trips, unlike every break. I was 8 years old and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building, it's more of a multi-story house. The front gate is a bit further from there, and the only entrance and exit of the building. So, since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us, and we would greet them because every tenant knows us, and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting a tenant is rare, but not impossible. Right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with a grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and sat on one of the chairs placed in a porch-like place. Not sure what exactly to call it, to be honest. From where the window thingy falls on my right side, and I could see it as well as the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate. So basically, he was able to look at my sister and friends through it. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and was just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friends to move to the other side, away from his sight, which she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy, and he was now staring at me. My body froze, and I could feel the fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move. I don't know why I stared back at him, and suddenly he started smiling. And when I say smiling, he was full on grinning from ear to ear. That scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage, got up and ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything, and just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell anything about this to my parents because I thought they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we came again to play, and I looked through the window just to make sure he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't, or so I thought. 15 minutes in, I spot this guy again. He was just standing there in the very same spot staring at us, at me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't do it for long, and we went back up again. From what I can remember, this happened about 3 to 4 days, and now my friends were starting to complain how I didn't let them play, and that they had to come back up earlier than they were supposed to. On the 4th or 5th day, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind not to pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a normal thing. And as per rules, it made us, the one responsible, must fetch the ball. My heart started beating because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball on the road and picked it up. He then held out his hand, gesturing me to come take it. I was scared shitless at this point, but I had to go, so I did. As soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent over, coming close to my ear, and his words still ring clearly in my ears till this day. "I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you." This is a rough translation in English. It sounded much worse. That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper from the little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and opened it. He had written his number and asked me to call him at 2 o'clock sharp in the afternoon, and that he knew my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I didn't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him through my mother's phone. He picked up the call, but I didn't have the courage to say anything, so I was silent. He said, "You're a good girl. You should come stay with me. Come outside, I'm waiting to pick you up." Because I live upstairs, I went to the balcony, and he was actually standing next to the gate, looking directly at me, waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and disconnected the call. I ran inside and bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mother didn't wake up, and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks, and everyone kept asking about it. I still didn't tell them, though. The guy stopped coming too. I don't remember the time he stopped coming, but he did, and I was relieved. Eventually, this experience started fading, and I grew up. Fast forward 10 years. I'm 18 and my mother asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and went out. The shop I had to go to was at the end of the road, several houses away, so not far. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because of the man standing behind me, because he kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked back at him, only to realize it was the same man. My face went pale, and I could hear my heart throbbing in my throat. I tried not to panic and calm myself down, telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public. There were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. As soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me. Because I was a regular there, and he was seeing me with this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and asked her to go home and inform my mom that the man was following us. Just in case he attacks, I'll have a backing and she'll be safe too. Our house is within vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside. And now, it was my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. Let's catch up." I kept walking and walking, but now that we were far from the shop, he started speed walking, and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner called for him loudly, saying that some of the money was still on the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day, and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 right now, and I hope I never meet him anywhere in the future. I hope I never see him again, and I don't know why it's instilled a paranoia in me, and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. Edit. I told my mom everything after that. Because my dad lives in another city for work, I didn't tell him since it would make him hella worried and possibly affect his work. My distant uncle is a local cop. He's quite close and trustworthy. We tried finding the creepy guy after that, but couldn't. He literally vanished in thin air. We asked the shop owner about him, but he said the guy came back, took his money, and went away. Nobody else paid enough attention to this guy, so we couldn't find anything. I go to college by public transport, so I have to walk around 1 kilometer to reach the stop. I take the other road, which is opposite to the road that leads to the shop. It takes longer, but I feel better at least. Not once have I seen that guy or felt anything creepy since then, which is a relief. But again, I'm kind of paranoid every time I step out, though I do carry pepper spray and a sharp keychain with me at all times. About moving out, we can't afford that just yet. Possibly after I complete my degree, which still has 3 years left. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what the beeping sound was all about. For those who don't know, an Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information like the victim's appearance, as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, make and model of vehicle. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room. An Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory that I have, where I believe with all my heart that I was almost kidnapped when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was laying dormant in my subconscious, and this random Amber Alert and a talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. This incident is something I pondered and thought about off and on for years. I'm a male, 41 years old now, by the way. It's just been a while since I've considered the factors and details of the experience, and this recent Amber Alert and talk with my daughter caused me to pause and reflect on the incident itself once again, and here I am. As a parent, you worry about these things and do all you can to protect your child, especially when you've personally experienced something truly scary like this. This happened when I was a young kid. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think it's a safe estimate based on the fact much of those early childhood memories aren't there anymore. I do remember my kindergarten experience, which I would have been 5 or 6, and also later grades. So this incident must have happened sometime after, or around the ages of 7 to 8. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town with not much to offer, so from time to time we would go to the neighboring city about 45 minutes away from where we were located. It just had more to offer. They would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because restaurants were better, and because my mom was a crafter. She loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were different craft stores and fabric stores she liked going to up there. This specific trip, we went to a fabric store up there, Joanne Fabrics to be exact. This was a pretty big store. As a little kid, I guess most places seemed pretty big, but no kidding, this was a sizable store. My dad stayed in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot. When there was a store he just didn't want to go in, and I can't blame him there. I can't recall exactly what my mom was looking for or trying to get in the store, but I do remember what section we were in. An area with a bunch of racks and various fabrics hanging. Imagine a clothing store with circular racks with clothes hanging around them. And that's pretty much what it looks like in a fabric store. Racks of hanging fabric. I remember this area being slightly towards the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these racks, I began to wander, though not far, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started wandering around. That's my guess at least. But I could still see my mom just a few racks over, so it wasn't like I was on the other side of the store or anything. A random man approached me, and honestly, I can't remember what direction he came from. I was there by myself one minute, and the next, I look up and saw this guy. It was like he came in fast and out of nowhere. I quickly looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a few racks up and away, but I could still see her. There was a fair distance between my mom and I at this point. So here I am standing behind some racks of fabric with this older guy opposite me in the other side of the rack. Then he speaks. "Hey little boy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this completely took me off guard. "Where are your folks at? Are you alone in here?" I stood still and quiet. "Come here, I got something to show you." At this point he started advancing towards me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other way, as if to meet me in the middle. I was scared at this moment and became instantly aware that this man seemed dangerous and like he was trying to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked fast to the left, but he did the same. He had this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I went, he followed. But remember, there's a rack between us. God, I'm so thankful for the rack. After some back and forth moments from me and the man, I finally lock in on my mom and yell, "Mom, help!" You would have thought I was screaming bloody murder, and it was so loud it got my mom's attention. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over my shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed, yep, that must be his mother. His demeanor completely changes, as if everything was just fun and games, and that he was just messing around. He said as much to my mom. "I was just messing around with him. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to where I was, and as we reconnected, the guy just tips his hat at my mom and makes his way out of the store. I explained to my mom what just happened, that the guy was trying to get me. I was so upset and shook up. She told me that I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. It was terrifying, for sure. I'm thankful something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things like maybe this guy was really just messing around? I very much think that there was nefarious intentions. Why would a random guy be pursuing me in a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts and fabrics, why promptly leave when confronted? I truly believe that he was up to no good. Anyway, that's my story. I appreciate anyone that took the time to read. This is a story that pops back into my mind from time to time. I've told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was 10 years old, my mom finally decided it was time for her to start taking lessons to get her driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided he wanted to do some practice with her, besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she would pass the upcoming test first try. My brother and I were attending swimming lessons at a nearby university at that time. Behind a forest area near the university lays a huge student parking area surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw that as an opportunity to take my mom there to drive around a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them, since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. We arrived at the parking lot later on in the evening. My parents began their practice. My brother and I quickly got bored though, and we asked if we could go to the little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us since they always were able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around in the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulls up into the lot. We were playing almost right next to the exit entrance. The car turns around and stops on my right side, with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down the window and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was good looking and young. I guess would be around 30. This is where things start to get weird. In the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could really see was her blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police and that we have to get in the car immediately, as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck out my arm in front of his chest, as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us again to get into his car, or else he would have to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly the woman put down the newspaper, showing her face, and told us in the most calm, motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive to us, since the road down from the parking lot was twisted away. Then it would take longer to drive than to cut through the field. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could. "Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck away from my children!" As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized that my brother and I weren't alone, he threw the car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shot himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat the guy himself. This resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who those people were, but this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you and the ones you love. I'm not sure what these people would have done with us. I am sure about one thing though. They definitely weren't from the police. This is so bizarre. This isn't even a memory I forgot, just one I basically turned into my own fun antidote to make it less scary. 11 years later, it's fucking scary, and I know how lucky I was. For context, I was a fresh 21-year-old and had recently rediscovered the love of dance and started enjoying concerts and festivals. I had attended my first festival at 20 and had the most amazing time volunteering and meeting people. It was a last minute and unexpected situation that first year, but after the amazing experience I had, I was hooked. It's prudent to add that I was extremely naive and obviously new to this kind of scene. So the next year, I had cut off the friends I had gone to the festivals with before, but still had friends of other friends that went that I got along with very well and had good memories with. So even though I was going to my second year at the same festival, I was going solo and just camping with friends of friends, which I suppose was the beginning of the problem. I got going kinda late, So when I got to the festival, the lines to get in were extremely long. I packed diligently, but the phone service wasn't great and I had a hard time contacting the semi-friends that I was camping with. By the time I had found them and had set up, it was dark. It was newer, but a pretty large festival, and I really have a bad sense of direction. In the future years, I learned to bring a battery or solar lights and obnoxious decorations because of the night. It was also in a different location that year, so unfamiliar with where I camped with my surroundings. My ex-roommate Tom and his girlfriend Gina were the ones I was closest to, and Tom was bringing some special acid for me as kind of an apology for not sticking up for me in a roommate situation. We all went to the first show together, but all got really high so fast. I took too much and knew it pretty quickly, so I knew the night was going to go sideways. But by the time I realized, Tom and Gina had wandered off, leaving me completely alone. I tried to find my way to my tent, thinking I'd lay down for a bit and be okay, but I couldn't remember how to get there or where it was. It was dark, and I was starting to panic, being that I was high as shit and didn't know where anyone I knew was, didn't know how to find my campsite or anything. I was in a crop top and jean shorts in the high desert at nighttime, so it started to get cold. I wandered over to the disco area because it was the first thing I found. Had a legit disco ball and all. I wandered around and see this woman in the most unusual clothing, think almost pioneer, so I went to talk to her. I generally to this day don't know if this person was real. That's how messed up I was. We ended up wandering around. Again, not sure if this was a real person or a hallucination. Trying to find my campsite when we reached the RV camp area. This man, maybe in his early 30s, with glow sticks, asked me if I want any, and we say, yeah. She goes first, and as soon as it's on her wrist, she skips away. I call out to her to wait, but she doesn't stop. The man looks at me and says, "Are you okay? Do you think you can find your friend?" I stupidly say, "Oh, I don't know her really. I can't find my campsite, and she was helping me, but oh well." He responds with, "You remind me a lot of my little sister. I wouldn't want you running around lost like this. Look, my buddy and I are gonna watch some shows, and I wouldn't feel right leaving you, so you can stay in his RV for a few hours." Obviously, I was too high, too young, too naive to see where this all would go, and I stupidly complied and followed him. It was fine at first. It was a toy hauler, so the back end was like a U-Haul that stayed open. The first guy put on an album I previously loved as a teenager, but now can barely listen to, tucked me in and left. I didn't see his buddy at this point. Fast forward God knows how many hours. I've been tripping out to this music when they got back. First thing was, the guy that had told me that I looked like his little sister climbed on top of me while I was half conscious, kissed my neck, and began touching me. Then I felt the second one, and his hands. I was still so high and out of it, but immediately told them to stop, that I wasn't in the place for that. They got angry, and the one who had gotten me there was the most frightening. I saw his eyes change in that moment, and I knew I was fucked if I couldn't get away. It didn't matter how high I was, I needed to get away from them. I don't even recall formulating a plan. I remember the main man saying, "We helped you, now you owe us," and slamming my knee into his groin. I may have forgotten that he was on top of me at this point. All I remember is running for my life into the prickly bushes, not knowing where I was, but desperately running away. The second man seemed a bit nervous about the whole thing and didn't do much except touch me, while the other held me down with the weight of his body. I met a couple of kind souls that calmed me down when I completely freaked out, crying, covered in dirt and thorns, and they gave me a safer space. I didn't sleep that night as I could no longer trust kind strangers, but I also couldn't find my camp. It was 10 yards away, as I discovered the next day. To the men who tricked me, trapped me, and would have done something inevitably bad to me, let's not meet again, and also fuck you both. Edit, I forgot to add this, cause it's a pretty intense memory for me, but I'm pretty sure the only reason I got away was because they were on something too. I hadn't even met Guy 2 before, so I don't know about him. But the one I did seemed crazed and very amped up and high and out of it. And yes, I know the whole thing was stupid of me. It was not even a month into 21 though, with very little life experience. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic. He constantly stims with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he will say, "Widdle wobbles," when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, who's 8, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there, with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter headed off, so he came over to talk to me. My son was in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time, and he hits himself on the head, so I constantly redirect him. This man asked if my son was autistic, and I say yes. He then asked me, when was he diagnosed? I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asked me if he was in regular classes or special needs. I didn't answer him right away because I'm getting uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class. He asks me what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer special needs classes, not specifying which school my son goes to. Then he asked if my son runs off a lot. I just reply sometimes. He notices a GPS tracker on my son's ankle. He asks how well that tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off. At this point, I realize this is not a conversation I want to have. I tell him I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore. He responds with, "I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him that not all autistic children are the same and that he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter over, who's upset because she's having fun with a little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks me why we had to go, and I tell her we have to go home to do stuff around the house. She's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because of that girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks it's her stepdad, and she says that the little girl told her that he was her mom's boyfriend. I ask what else she said about him. She tells me the little girl said, "Tom likes to talk to girls like your mom, and it makes my mom mad." I then asked if there was anything else, and she tells me that the girl said that she was glad she met my daughter because she's the only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me that the little girl asked for her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single. Could be more sinister than that. I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and said they're sending an officer to the park. By the time the officer got to the park, a couple hours later though, they were, of course, gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and little girl's first names, and what I think he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume it was his vehicle in the lot. They tell me that they'll call me if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update: the man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend, who's a sheriff deputy in the county to the south of me. They had got similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video and his license plate at this time. My brother's friend sent me this guy's mugshot and asked me if it was the man. It was. He was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was in a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him, and he couldn't tell me anything other than she's safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me yesterday. I found out his name and looked up all his charges. He had warrants in states north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment, and new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have any charges brought up against him, but my story may be needed for the case. I'm not a lawyer or law enforcement, so I don't know specifics on how or why, but maybe to show a trend in his behavior targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think I went too far calling the police in this case. I'm confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it went unreported. This is a story about how I was almost kidnapped by a coworker. Who knows what he was planning? You tell me. When I was in high school, I worked for a family-owned plant nursery and garden store. At the time this took place, I was a cashier and had been working there for 2 to 3 years. It's important to note that while I was in high school, I also attended a vocational school. The students at this vocational school came from all over the county, so it wasn't uncommon to have friends or know people from a few towns over. The place I worked was a perfect spot for a teenager to get a job. There were a good mix of adult employees and teen employees, and was a fantastic place to work. During summer one year, a boy started working there. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Connor. I recognized him from the vocational school we attended. We got a bit friendly at work, but I would have never considered him a friend, just a coworker, acquaintance. To be honest, I always had an off feeling about him. His mannerisms and actions just made me feel uncomfortable, but I had no reason to be mean or dislike him because he never gave me a reason to. It's hard to explain, but I just got a gut feeling of some kind. Before I go any further, I want to give a little more context about my job. To get to work and home, I took a bus or got a ride from my dad. The bus stop was about a 15-minute walk from my job, and the ride included a transfer at some point. If the buses were on time, it was a 25-minute commute. With rush hour and late hours and full buses, it could take 45 minutes plus. My dad only really drove me to and from on the weekends. After a few weeks, the more interactions with Connor, I started to get the feeling that he liked me. Whatever register I was on, there were multiple throughout the store, he would frequently make passes at and sometimes even stop to chat for a minute. I always maintained a friendly coworker vibe and did not do or say anything that may have made him feel different. One day, he asked if I wanted a ride home. I found this odd because I didn't think he had a car, as I always saw him skateboarding to work. I just declined, and we went about our day. The next weekend he asked again, and again I declined. I asked if he had a car, and he said no, but he could ask to borrow a car from his parents and drive me home. I told him that wasn't necessary. I didn't mind taking the bus, and it just so happened that my dad was picking me up. This exchange probably happened 5 or 6 more times. Gotta give it to him, this boy had some persistence. Every time I politely declined, but after the 3rd time, it started to creep me out. In my high school teenage girl mind, I thought I was making it pretty clear that I wasn't interested in spending more time together. The last time he asked, I caved. He asked early in the morning. It just so happened that day, it was planned that my dad was going to pick me up from work, but he had told me on the way to work he wasn't going to be able to. I can't remember why. Something with his girlfriend, I'm sure. Anyway, I was feeling pretty bummed about having to walk and take the bus. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to thunderstorm all day. Connor came up to me as I was opening my register and said, "Hey, I finally got my own car." I was happy for him, as our conversations at work in the recent weeks were about his parents possibly bringing him car shopping soon. We talked about it and I congratulated him. Then he asked if I wanted to ride home that day. At this point, I was honestly fed up with that. I thought, what the hell? Maybe if I say yes and let him drive me home once, he'd stop asking, so I agreed. The day goes on and eventually lunch rolls around. I take my break and end up going to eat in the break room. When my break was almost over, another employee comes up and starts talking about how there was a couple cop cars in the parking lot with their lights on, and 2 officers went into the admin office. The rest of the story is what I pieced together from what the others told me. The local police made occasional drive-bys of my place of employment. The owners had some family friends who were officers, and they looked out for them. I guess on this day, that family friend cop did a drive-by and noticed a car in the parking lot that had been reported stolen that morning. He pulled over to investigate. I guess at this time, when another officer pulled up, a backpack was spotted, very crappily hidden behind a nearby tree. They do some investigating, found some things along with an ID, and went into the admin's office. The police officers tell them what they found, and Connor is called back to speak with them. It turns out Connor had stolen his uncle's car that morning. The backpack that was found had his ID in it, along with a rope, duct tape, and a switchblade. When he was called into the office, his uncle and parents were called. I guess his uncle said that he didn't want to press charges, which is why Connor didn't leave with the police. The boss asked Connor to leave for the day, and he did. I don't know if he was questioned about the contents of the backpack, and if he was, I don't know what his answers were, or the reasoning for having all those things. No one knew that he was going to give me a ride home that day. I hadn't told anyone. It wasn't until after things went down that I told my mom. Connor didn't work there long after that. The whole thing creeped me out so bad, I made it a point not to run into him at the vocational school. I remember using humor as a coping mechanism of the whole weird thing. Oftentimes, my mom and I would joke around about the guy who was going to try to kidnap me. I only remember this now because 2 or 3 years ago, I was scrolling through Facebook when I came across a shared memorial post. I recognized the face, and when I checked the profile, it clicked where I knew that face from. It was Connor. I had blocked this kid, and this clearly traumatizing experience out as well. I completely forgot about him, his name, that we worked together, what happened, and by this time it had been 8 years. After some digging, I learned that he had died from a drug overdose, and on his profile, it had his previous place of employment, one being my old job. This made me message my mom. I texted her and said something along the lines of, "Do you remember Connor?" "Are you serious?" "What? You mean the guy that was going to kidnap you?" That was all she had to say. I had a crazy flashback. I was so surprised and concerned that I could block out something like that. I'm clearly still trying to process it. It's been 2 years since the conversation with my mom. But anyways, this is my creepy encounter. I'm a 29-year-old male. I was out partying this Friday night with 4 of my female friends, 2 of which I had just met that evening. We were having drinks at a club in Central Europe. The night was going great. We were dancing, talking, all of us had fun. At about 2 a.m., the girls grabbed a taxi and went home. I stayed a bit more in the club to finish my drink. I had danced on the stage for about 20 minutes, then I grabbed a taxi and went home. When I arrived on the street where I live, my drunk ass realized that I have no keys and couldn't get in, as I live alone. I called another taxi and went back to the club to look for my keys. First, I went to the bar to see if anyone had brought any lost keys to them. Unfortunately, they didn't have my keys, so I started to look for them in the club in every place that I was that night. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and had been looking for my keys in the mass of people. About 10 minutes goes by, and I haven't found anything apart from broken glass and cigarette butts. I went back to the place where I initially was looking for them. This is the place where I was having the drinks with the girls. I started looking for my keys on the sitting benches instead of the ground. I had my keys in the inside pocket of my jacket as I always do, and my jacket was placed on the corner of the bench the whole night before I left. People were sitting on the benches, and they had their jackets on the benches too. I sat down near the corner where I was sitting before, and beside me was a guy with lines of drugs on his phone, freely giving them to other people. He had put his jacket on the corner of the bench, and I wanted to look at that corner to see if my keys had been pushed off the corner or something. So I grabbed his jacket, and to my surprise, my keys were right under his jacket, in the middle of the bench. I was so happy to find my keys. I was drunk and pretty much started yelling how happy I was to find my keys, as I was getting fucking desperate at the moment. There was a guy on the bench that I had met with the girls before in the club. I'll call him L. He was nice during the whole night, so I kept talking to L when I found my keys. I even went to the bar and grabbed another beer just to talk to him for a bit. I went to the toilet to have a pee, and when I came back, L had found himself an acquaintance to which he was talking to. So I just finished my beer while I smoked a cigarette and got ready to go home. This is when the guy that had lines of drugs on his phone started talking to me. I would call him Pedro, as it was definitely a fake name that he gave me. I was talking to him in English. Pedro was 19 years old, and he was from Colombia. He told me stories of his life in Colombia and how his family struggled. He told me that his father died recently, and he is the oldest son, so he's in Slovakia trying to make some money for his family. He even showed me photos of him and his family back in Colombia. I sympathized with Pedro and was feeling sorry for him. After about 20 minutes, El scored with a girl that he had met, and he said that they were going home. He asked Pedro if he has any MDMA on him, and Pedro sold him some. People around the bench had seen what was happening, so they wanted to get some drugs from Pedro, so he started to make lines on his phone. I told Pedro I'm going home and wished him best of luck, grabbed my jacket and started walking. This is when Pedro called out to me and stopped me, said that it's late and that he should go back to his hotel too. He scratched the drugs from his phone onto the table, took his belongings, and told the people that they could finish whatever was left for free. Pedro and I walked out of the underground club. When we were outside, he asked me if I could walk him to his hotel, which was nearby, a 5-minute walk. He told me in the club that he has no friends, no family in Slovakia. I really sympathized for him. I told him sure, I can walk you to the hotel. We were talking the whole walk, and he was saying real nice things to me, like how I get his situation and how good of a person I am. When we arrived at the hotel, the door was closed, and he messaged someone to come open the door for him. He asked if I wanted to have one last beer with him, to which I said sure, but I'll be on my way as soon as I finish the beer. Some girl came and opened the door for us. They had spoken Spanish as they greeted us. The hotel itself didn't really look like a public hotel. There was a reception and stairs up, and on the left was the dining room. Pedro told me to wait for him in the dining room. This was like 5 a.m. already. I went into the dining room and there was a girl sitting with her laptop. I greeted her with "Hola" and sat down. Pedro came after about 3 to 5 minutes with 2 open cans of some beverage. There was a parrot and a Jack Daniels logo. The can was a gold color, I think. This is the moment that I should have been suspicious and not drink from an open can. My naive drunk ass overlooked the fact that I have to drink from the can. I was talking to Pedro about drug cartels in Colombia and how their politics are fucked up. After about 10 minutes, I started feeling weird and looked over at my phone. My hands and eyes were tingling. I was quickly aware of what was happening now. I turned on the location and mobile data on my phone and put the phone in a different pocket than I had all night. Pedro started asking me how I was feeling, to which my adrenaline levels blow up. I started to think that I'm being abducted by some Colombian human trafficking ring. My sight started to weirdly tingle and the lights were blinding me. My jaw was messed up, as if I was pushing my teeth together. I have taken drugs in the past, and this felt like a stimulant and a disassociative, which was really weird for me to understand. I tried to keep my voice calm and mind present. I told Pedro that I know what was going on and asked why he gave me the stimulant, if he was trying to make me unconscious. Pedro's hand started to shake, and he didn't answer me. The girl on the laptop looked right into my eyes, the first time she even moved her body. Pedro grabbed his phone and started to write down something on WhatsApp. I tried to convince Pedro that they made a mistake with the dose and that I was fine, apart from knowing that they had drugged me. I think that Pedro had drugged me in the club while I went to the toilet, which is why he quickly got up when I was leaving. Everything I said, Pedro rewrote to someone else, and he was waiting for incoming messages before saying anything to me. I started to talk to the girl too, told her that I don't give a fuck about what they're doing there, but I'm walking out. At that moment, I remember saying that I get what Pedro's doing, but I don't get what the girl's part of this was, to which I pointed a finger at her. Pedro got a notification on his phone, and he told me that he was sorry and I can go home if I want. I didn't respond to him. I got my drugged ass up, and I was walking out of the dining room. I stopped by the girl with her laptop, stared right into her eyes, and I held my right hand up in a fist bump. She looked me in the eyes, gave me a fist bump, and did a weird grimace with her face. I walked to the door at the reception, which was closed. I started to kick and punch the door while yelling, "Open the fucking door!" The receptionist did, and I walked out. My heart was pumping, my whole body was shaking. I was feeling both dizzy and awake. I ran to the main street and I was calling my mom to come get me as fast as possible, but I didn't know where I was. I was feeling disassociated and I couldn't really apprehend what just happened. As I got to the main street where a bus stop was, I started feeling very paranoid. There was a white Mercedes SUV that stopped right at the main road near the bus stop that I stood at. They turned off the car lights and were just sitting there. I told all of this to my mom, and she told me to look for a camera. I found one and stood right under the camera, which was at the bus stop, to make sure that I'm being seen. I was feeling and talking weirdly, to which my mom told me to talk to her, to tell her what I could see around me. I had seen a few people that walked down the main street. Everyone was on their phone and occasionally looking at me. One guy came close to the bus stop and I approached him while I still was on the phone with my mom. I asked him, "What does he want from me?" And he was like, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" To which I said that I'm sorry. After about 10 minutes of me being on the phone with my mom, the white SUV turned the engine on and left. My mom came by car soon after. I was walking to her car on the road, but I couldn't walk properly. I felt paranoid, tons of adrenaline going through my body. My heart was pumping so fast that I thought I was going to have some kind of seizure. I managed to get to my mom's car. She was in her pajamas, very scared. I started to tell her everything that happened. I told her to drive around the city instead of driving me straight home, just in case they were following us. We were driving around for maybe an hour, talking about what happened during that night, how the inside of the building looked and all. My jaw was going so crazy that my mom could hear it, and she was really scared for me. The whole ride I was feeling really weird. At one point, I felt like my soul left my body. I can't really describe it. I didn't feel like myself, like I'm not real. Lights were blinding me and my vision was blurred and tingly, like my eyes were going up and down all the time. I did not feel any rushes of euphoria or anything. I thought that they gave me some mix of drugs. I arrived at my home around 7:30 a.m. My mom stayed home with me, comforting me. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. We were talking about going to the police and also if I was in any kind of danger anymore. At around 11 a.m., I fell asleep. During this time, my mom cleaned my apartment and my sister came to visit me. I don't know what I would do without my family. One of my girlfriends that was with me during that night came to visit me. As I talked to her, I thought I got some kind of episode, like schizophrenic or something. Why the hell would I be a target of something like this? I'm a chubby bearded guy. Why would they want to abduct me? I'm afraid of going to the police as our police department and politics are corrupt. And as long as I can remember, they've always been tied to mafia. They would take my testimony, start to investigate, and probably be stopped by their officials. I still don't fully believe that what happened to me was an experience with a human trafficking ring. However, there's so many red flags that make it seem like it. Like, why was Pedro scared after I called him out? Why wouldn't he talk to me unless someone sent him a message on his phone? Why would he even start to message someone during our conversation? Why the fuck would he drug me without me knowing it? But ultimately, why the fuck would they let me go? So Pedro and the two girls from the weird hotel, and possibly the Colombian human trafficking ring, let's fucking not meet again. Update. I went to the ER with my mom as I woke up with spasms all over my body. They gave me an IV and sent a sample of my blood for a toxicology report. They did some tests, EKG and blood pressure, and they sent me home approximately 3 hours ago. There are traces of acetylfentanyl, methylphenidate, and ketamine in my blood. Also, while I was being given an IV, the doctor said to my mom that this is not uncommon, that they have had lots of patients who have been unknowingly drugged during the last few years. He said that it wasn't common before. I'm now a 41-year-old female, but when I was 20 years old, I attended college in Northeast Pennsylvania. I lived off campus and had a part-time job at the local mall. The mall was just over a mile away, and I would walk to and from work regularly. The mall generally closed at 9 p.m., and I would finish up my closing tasks and start walking home around 9:30 p.m. or 10 at the latest. Occasionally, I would get a ride home from a coworker, but most of them were high schoolers getting picked up by their parents. One night, I was walking my familiar route home. There are never many people out and about downtown until I got back onto campus, which I would cut across to get home. This night, I was only a few blocks from the mall, and I noticed a van parked next to the corner, but didn't think anything of it initially. There were always a smattering of cars parked around. The van appeared to be running, and the headlights were on. As I got a bit closer, I noticed the sliding door on the side was open. I definitely noticed, but assumed that someone must be loading something in and out of one of the local businesses along the street. As I walk past the van, there's a sudden flurry of movement to my left. There had apparently been a man crouched by the dumpster there, and he was running straight at the open van door. The scary part was that I was directly between him and the open van door. He was trying to shove me inside the van. I screamed, and I can only credit my complete awkward lack of coordination for what happened next. I tripped and stumbled when he surprised me, so when he hit me, I was already falling down to the ground. The force he hit me with only got my head and shoulders into the open door, while the majority of my body was outside on the ground. I remember he grabbed me around the waist and was trying to hoist me up through the door, but I was just discombobulated dead weight. He jumped over me into the van, grabbed a handful of my hair and started pulling me off the ground into his van. This is when headlights of a car turning down the street washed over me, and I could briefly see that this was a white guy in a black hoodie. When I saw the car, I screamed louder and started wildly flailing my arms. I heard their brakes screech, and then the guy let go of my hair. I jumped back and the hooded bastard slammed the door shut, and seconds later accelerated away. A cute little white-haired Polish woman had been in the car that turned down the road at that exact right moment to save me. She hugged me and told me I was safe, and it was then that I realized I was still screaming. She sat on the sidewalk with me and then walked me to her car. Cell phones were relatively new. Neither of us had one. She drove me to the police station and stayed with me while I answered questions and made a report. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. My housemate with a car let me borrow it anytime I was going to work after that, and I never walked downtown after that. I had nightmares for a while. I can't help but think what could have happened to me.